In the heart of the dark, mysterious depths, where thrill seekers embark on daring exploits, dreaming of tales to tell, a thrilling adventure took an unforeseen turn. What began as an adrenaline-fueled pursuit of discovery transformed into a harrowing tale of innovation, challenges, and a devastating twist. This is Fatal Tragedies with the story of Joe Ivy and Tim Stitch. Joe started exploring caves with the San Antonio Grotto when he was just 16. Despite initial doubts due to his preppy and somewhat nervous nature, Joe's journey in caving turned into a tale of persistent excellence. By the age of 18, he had overcome his apprehensions, and in his late 20s, he earned international recognition for his strength, caving skills, leadership, and irreverent sense of humor. Throughout his life, Joe passionately explored hundreds of caves in the US and Mexico, contributing significantly to cave surveys. Notable achievements include leading the exploration of Pau de Montemayor, turning it into the deepest cave in northern Mexico at 1,689 feet. He was a crucial member of the Cueva Cheve project, one of the world's deepest caves. Joe also played a key role in the exploration of Mexico's Cueva de la Puente, extending its length to over 8 kilometers, defying previous expectations. Beyond his adventures, Joe co-owned Gonzo Guano Gear, designing top-notch caving equipment that he thoroughly tested on his expeditions. With a degree in geography and environmental management, he worked for 13 years in karst hydrogeological, biological, and environmental research. In his final years, Joe's expertise led him to teach courses in vertical and rescue techniques. He left behind a legacy embraced by his companion and business partner, Rebecca Jones, his brother Marvin Ivy, sister-in-law Christy Ivy, niece Ashley Ivy, and a vast international family of cavers who admired and respected him. Joe Ivy's story is one of triumph, passion, and the pursuit of the extraordinary underground world. The 09 Well. 09 Well stands as a classic cave in the heart of Texas, offering a thrilling adventure for those equipped with a wetsuit and skilled in rope techniques. Plunging 100 meters into the earth, this multi-drop cave holds more than just natural wonders. It carries the echoes of history. Once a pivotal stop on the Ozana-San Angelo stagecoach line and frequented during the cattle drives between Mexico and Kansas City, 09 Well bears witness to a bygone era. Even today, a windmill draws water from the depths of the cave, connecting the present to its historical roots. Managed by TCMA for the University Land System, 09 Well has a special significance. Access is restricted to TCMA members for management or research-related trips, but recreational visits can be arranged with prior coordination. To embark on this subterranean journey, a formal request process is in place. Prospective adventurers should contact the cave manager well in advance of their planned trips. Descending into the 09 Well is not just a physical descent, it's a plunge into history and geological marvels. Reaching around 100 meters in depth, the well boasts a series of drops. From the initial 127 descent at the entrance, the downstream section presents 5 more rope drops leading to a sump. In the dome above the sump, Joe Ivy, a fearless explorer, spotted what seemed to be an infeeder in the ceiling, a potential passage to more undiscovered cave wonders. In March 2000, Joe Ivy, accompanied by Tim Stitch, who was an experienced and seasoned caver with a wealth of cave knowledge, set their sights on a bold bolt climb up the dome, ready to unravel the mysteries hidden within the depths of 09 Well. So they set up the Aid Climb. Now, climbing the well was a real adventure for Joe and Tim. They used a cordless hammer drill and some gear to keep them safe, but what made their climb special was the self-belay system. Here's how it worked. Joe drilled and secured 2 bolts at the start of the climb. Then he attached something called a Kong slide to them. This slide thing is like a small metal plate with holes. They threaded the rope through these holes in a way that created some cool friction. The slide's job was to turn their 9mm static rope into a dynamic system. Normally, the rope stays put, but if someone falls, it can slip through the slide and soak up the energy of the fall. Pretty smart, right? And so, Joe and Tim went up. The rope connected to the slide went through the protection and down to them. The lead climber's tool, called an ascender, was used to connect to the rope, It helped adjust the length of the rope, which is something usually done by the person holding the rope, but they made it work differently. During their first climb, both Joe and Tim had some falls, but the setup handled it like a champ. The falls were about 13 feet on average, slide dancing included. Tim mentioned that in his fall, there was about 22 feet of rope below the top piece, making his fall less intense. They used a special protection gadget called a Climb Tech Removable Bolt, or RB. These are like reusable hooks that go into the holes they drill. Joe and Tim tried different sizes, both 3/8 of an inch and 1/2 inch RBs, but had a bit of a surprise when the 1/2 inch RB unexpectedly pulled during Tim's fall. Joe also had a fall on a 3/8 inch piece, thinking he placed it not so great. It's tough to keep these RBs clean from water and mud, which messes with how well they work. After their first trip, they decided to stick with the 3/8 inch ones, ditching the bigger size. Climbing in the well was like a mix of using some fancy gear, taking tumbles, and dancing with ropes and bolts. Joe and Tim made their climb an exciting adventure, leaving us all wondering what's next. The day of the accident. Joe and Tim dedicated 5 trips to tackle the climb spread across 3 weekends. The last weekend, specifically on September 30th, marked a significant breakthrough. Joe and Tim entered the well in a company of 16 fellow cavers. They managed to clear a muddy section that had posed serious challenges on the second weekend. This mud was a real headache, making it super tough to handle their gear. As they approached the final stretch, about 50 meters off the ground, things improved. The mud reduced and they found themselves in what looked like a good rock. Joe, taking his usual role of setting up the slide rigging at the belay point, kicked off the climb. Making a solid 6 meters of progress, he descended to the fixed line below and rappelled back to the base. Hungry and thirsty, he announced his plan to grab a bite and a drink. While he took his break, other cavers from the trip visited the bottom room. Some were still there when Joe made his way down the standing line. Tim, on the other hand, got some tools and gear from Joe, including adjustable stirrup triers that Joe designed himself. Tim preferred these over the standard ones Joe had. He climbed up to the anchor for the fixed line, attached himself to the lead rope, and made the switch to the ascenders at the end of the rope coming down from Joe's last bolt. The rope had passed through a line of 3/8 inch bolts to Joe's last protection and bolt. At this part of the climb, they used 3-inch wedge and sleeve-type bolts. Tim was all set, attached to the lead rope, ready to continue where Joe left off. The climb was like a puzzle, with each piece falling into place as Joe and Tim pressed on, overcoming challenges and reaching new heights. But little did they know that things would soon take a turn for the worse. Tim placed 8 bolts as he ascended, reaching a point about 15 feet or 5 meters below their target passage. However, he ran into a challenge. He didn't have enough bolt hangers to complete the climb, and fatigue had taken its toll. At this point, Tim decided to descend. Setting 2 bolts to anchor the fixed line, Tim descended, removing hangers and carabiners from the bolts below. He handed over the bolting equipment and hardware to Joe, informing him that the belay rope might not reach the top of the climb. Joe, ready for the challenge, coiled an extra rope, attached it to his harness, and climbed up the fixed line. The accident. Tim was amazed at Joe's speed. He disappeared from view quickly. As Tim waited below, he could hear other cavers approaching and see the dim glow of Joe's headlamp far above. Then, about 30 to 45 minutes into Joe's ascent, Tim heard a scream, followed by a loud crash. He called out to Joe, but received no response. Joe's lights were no longer visible above. Despite past experiences of mud and rock falling on the climb, this was different, much louder. Tim sensed that something had gone wrong. If everything was okay, Joe would have said something. The eerie silence from Joe was unsettling. Tim shouted up multiple times, desperately hoping for a response, but there was only silence. This turn of events became terrifying for Tim, left wondering about Joe's safety and what had transpired up there in the depths of the climb. As Tim's shouts reached Sarah Springer, an approaching caver, she quickly grasped the urgency and informed Sean Vincent, another caver. Within seconds, Sean was on his way to the surface. Tim, still shouting for help, began to hear Joe's moans and attempts to speak. Sarah descended to Tim's location, and he swiftly geared up with ascending equipment, climbing the standing line. Joe's moans were unsettling, coming from a point well below where they had last climbed. When Tim finally saw Joe, he found him wedged within a slot above a muddy ramp they had discovered earlier. Joe's legs were slightly raised, his helmet missing, later found and put back on, and smears of blood marked the left wall. Joe repeatedly expressed difficulty breathing. He'd fallen 12 to 18 meters, hitting a steep sloping ledge on the left before wedging into the slot above the muddy ramp. Tim climbed above the slot and then down climbed to Joe from behind. It became apparent that Joe was not attached to any rope, posing a risk of slipping down the ramp and off of the wall. Tim promptly tied a quick overhand knot in the rope below him and secured Joe's harness to it. Concerned about Joe's injuries, Tim inquired, and Joe responded, "Can't breathe. Left arm messed up." Attempting to pull Joe through the slot, Tim grasped his right arm. Joe yelled in pain, but when asked about the other arm, he insisted, "Everything hurts. Do it anyway." With determination, Tim pulled Joe, instructing him to kick. Eventually, Joe came out of the slot and slid down onto the top of the muddy ramp. The uneven ledge there was barely large enough to sit on, making it challenging to lie prone. Tim reasoned that this spot was the best place to attend to Joe's injuries, as the alternative of passing him through the slot and rappelling immediately to the bottom seemed less suitable. Joe, still loudly expressing difficulty breathing, became the focus of Tim's attention as they faced the challenging situation together. Joe's harness, the one he used to ascend and descend, slid up around his chest, constricting his ribcage and essentially strangling him. Aware of the danger of removing Joe's harness due to the risk of him falling off the ledge, Tim faced a steep angle that prevented him from pulling Joe onto the ledge. With time running out, Tim decided to get Joe off the wall altogether. He noticed the weight on the rope below him, supported by two rocks jammed on top of the slot. Tim asked Sarah to transition him to a new vertical caving line, but she lacked the knowledge of how to change the ropes or rappel while being on the rope. Tim instructed her to keep climbing while he considered that he couldn't describe the changeover successfully. Leaving Joe, Tim climbed up out of the slot to meet Sarah, attempting to help her change over to his part of the rope. Unfortunately, the rope was deeply jammed between two choke stones, hindering Sarah's ascent. The rescue struggle. By this time, Joe's condition had deteriorated significantly. He had lost consciousness, though sporadic breathing continued. Despite the challenges, Sarah and Tim worked together to move Joe to the ledge, aiming to relieve the weight from his harness and allow him to breathe. However, Joe's body, covered in slick mud, made it challenging to grab anywhere but the harness, worsening his breathing. Facing this disaster, Tim maneuvered along the sides of the ledge, using his legs to pull Joe up temporarily, alleviating the weight on the harness. After some time, Joe began slipping down again into the lower position in the deadly slot. Realizing the futility of efforts to get him onto the ledge, Tim prepared to get Joe off the wall entirely. The rope needed to be removed from the choke stones and then passed through the back of the slot. At this point, it became painfully obvious that Joe had stopped breathing altogether. While administering CPR seemed challenging given Joe's awkward position, Tim and Sarah were 100% committed to getting him down. Tim guided Joe down the muddy ramp, frequently pulling his legs out from under him and getting him unstuck. Eventually, Joe slid out, and Tim rappelled with Joe to the base of the wall. At the bottom, Tim urgently searched for a knife to cut Joe's harness off. Calls for assistance had gone out to cavers in central Texas around 11 p.m. on September 30th, and the rescue team, including Tim Comer, James Davis, Rod Dennison, Tommy Gillis, Monty Strange, Charlie Savas, and Frank Delgado, worked together during the entirety of the rescue attempt. Despite Tim's efforts to get Joe's harness off, it became apparent that Joe had likely died. CPR was attempted, but it proved futile. The rescue team faced the significant challenge of getting Joe's body out of the cave, moving it up to the second drop before taking a break around 3 a.m. on October 1st. Trained cave rescue personnel, led by John Green, finished the recovery up around noon. The exact cause of Joe's fall at the top of the climb remains unknown. It's speculated that one or possibly two anchors were placed before his fall. The muddy cave environment presented extreme challenges, and problems with the spring-loaded devices used in the bolt climb could have occurred. Joe's belay system suffered a severe shock load during the fall, causing the ascender to cut through the ropes. The use of a 9mm static caving rope instead of the more typical 10mm or 11mm dynamic rope reduced the system's ability to absorb the shock. Investigators believe that Joe had moved the slide belay device closer to the top of the climb, decreasing the rope length and intensifying the shock load in the belay system. The choice of a stronger rope might have made a crucial difference in the outcome of the climb. Well, this leaves me with one question for you. What's the wildest place you'd explore for a thrill? Share your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling adventures and exploration tales. Until then, keep exploring, stay curious, and never stop seeking the extraordinary.